Welcome to Wholehearted Healing with Jo, the podcast where we dive deep into the journey of healing body, mind, and soul. I'm Jo, a manual osteopath and holistic health coach, here to help women like you reconnect with your authentic self, release what no longer serves you, and step into your highest potential. Together we'll explore empowering tools, have soulful conversations, and transformative practices to guide you toward wholehearted living. Whether it's emotional healing, physical alignment, or finding balance in your life, this is your space to grow, heal, and thrive. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's begin this beautiful journey together. Okay, welcome back to another episode of Wholehearted Healing with Jo. It's been a minute. I needed a much needed break, just to kind of get some clarity, figure out where things are at. As you've probably already noticed, I've finally got an intro, which is super exciting, because before I was just kind of recording and starting them if you're new here. Today we're going to be talking about breaking cycles and how we can get out of certain patterns, certain habits, and so why we feel stuck and that sort of thing. So if you're someone who's feeling stuck, I do actually have a new workshop that I started, or that I created, and that is available. It's called Liberated. I will leave the link for that down below. As well as if you're interested in any of the things that I am talking about on the podcast, definitely follow me on Instagram. It's where I post a lot more of the short snippet, just quicker, I guess, information, just because it's bite size. So if you like these longer formats, you might also enjoy the shorter on the Instagram as well. I plan on being more consistent with the channel, the podcast channel. As well, I have a little bit of I'm getting over a cold basically. So if my throat's a little funky, I apologize, but hopefully not. The workshop is new. I have an intro to my podcast now, which is super exciting. And if you are watching this on YouTube, you can now see my face. So we have all the video that's going to be uploaded on the YouTube channel if you are interested in that, watching it that way. I think I'm going to also try to upload it on Spotify, but hopefully I can figure that out, but we'll see. I should be able to. I can't imagine it's that hard, but those are the two that kind of allow the video component, like the YouTube and the Spotify, so the video will be there as long as I can do it. So yeah, that's pretty much the basis. Like I said, I'm going to be back. I'm going to be working on hopefully weekly content for the podcast. And ideally it'll kind of come out with like Wednesdays is what I'm thinking. Obviously life happens, things happen, and sometimes I need to change up my schedule. So I make space for that too. So the other piece is you might not always see me in this area. I'm kind of playing around with some different spots to kind of sit and record. So bear with me in that sense too. So getting into today's topic, like I said, we are talking about breaking cycles. I do have my notes kind of in front of me, so if you see me kind of look down, that's what I'm looking at. But basically, how can we get out of patterns, especially when we feel stuck, right? Because, I've experienced this in my own life, and I think if you haven't experienced this in any capacity, you might be lying to yourself, because we're human, right? But this is a big thing, and this is really what I've been wanting to work with and have been working with women to help them kind of overcome. And so looking at kind of the holistic aspect of like what keeps us stuck in patterns, what holds us in certain patterns. So we can be stuck in scenarios or patterns in any area of our life. Specifically one in my life that I have very clearly, I feel, gotten myself out of a loop was even in my relationships. And I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I was finding myself perpetually in the same type of relationship or situation even. And at some point I had to be like, I'm the common denominator here, right? So like what am I doing? And not to shame myself or not to put myself down, but like, how am I contributing to this and taking responsibility for the situation? And when I really did take a look at things, I was able to then shift that narrative and move out of that, and remove myself from certain patterns, because I was also aware of like my own thoughts and my own beliefs and what the things that were starting to pop up that subconsciously were kind of there, and I didn't even realize I was acting from that place. And so if we want to see change in our life, that is why, you know, being able to identify the pattern and then also remove ourselves from that pattern is crucial, because we can't change anything if we just keep going on the hamster wheel, right? We just keep returning and going through that cycle. And so whenever we feel stuck in our life, it's essentially asking us to take a look and figure out where am I contributing, or how can I approach this differently to stop the cycle, to break the pattern. So first things first, if we're trying to remove ourselves from a pattern, is we have to see the pattern. And so look at reoccurring themes, reoccurring outcomes, right? I always end up in the same space. I always date the same type of person. I always plateau at this amount of money, right? Like whatever it is in your life, it could even just be like, I get bad outcomes all the time, or just like I have shitty luck, or like, you know what I mean? Like it could be anything. So what is that pattern that you consistently keep finding yourself in? Maybe it's like you never finish anything, right? Like you start projects, but you never finish them, or, you know, you procrastinate starting a project, or whatever the thing is, right? So first you have to identify what is the pattern. What is the thing that keeps reoccurring in your life? And it could be your actions. It could be people that are in your life. It could be situations. It could be so many different things, but what keeps showing up for you? And I like to think a lot of times when this keeps showing up for us, it keeps showing up because we're meant to learn, you know, a lesson from this. We're meant to overcome this. We're meant to work through this. So that's the first thing, is identifying what the pattern even is and what you're noticing. And so that takes a little bit of like self-reflection in that component. Now, the second thing, once you have identified a pattern, is understanding where it comes from. So we have to then look a little bit further back, maybe in our childhood, the things we've experienced, learned behaviors, or even like things we've been brought up with, of what people have said around us that maybe it doesn't even like fully resonate with us, but we still act from that space. And like, what are we doing that keeps that pattern going, right? So in my relationships, what I was noticing was like, I never vocalized what it was that I wanted. Like I would kind of just go with the flow, because there was a part of me that was worried that if I didn't say what it was that I wanted, that person would leave. So there's a little bit of like an abandonment piece there, but there's also a component of like me standing up and saying, this is what I want. It's what I'm looking for. If you're not looking for that, great, see you, bye. There was a part of me that had resistance to that. And literally the second I started doing that for myself, the clarity in relationships of whether they were for me or not for me was very evident. I started attracting different types of people who wanted the same things as me, because I was vocalizing those things. And so again, we have to identify like what keeps me in this pattern. And in other words, the other way you can look at it is, what can I do differently to change this pattern? Because by looking at what you can do differently, that's the thing, right? Like that's that area. And we can always go deeper into the emotional piece, but sometimes it's hard to sometimes identify like things from childhood, or things like to get super nitty gritty. I don't always necessarily believe we have to get super hyper fixated on like where it comes from. More so, we need to understand our actions. And when we can understand our actions, then we can choose differently. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we need to understand where it comes from, or just explore that a little bit. The third thing that we need to do in order to break the pattern is to shift our perspective. And so by, again, identifying first the pattern, then we go, okay, well, what's keeping me here? Once we have that, then we can go, okay, well, how can I reframe this to either shift my belief system, take different actions, right? Like how can I flip this and understand that I need to come at this from a different perspective? And once you first identify things, it makes it so much easier because you start to catch yourself when you're not doing that, right? Or when you fall into your patterns, it's so much more evident. And sometimes it's hard. Like the last two aspects of these are really challenging, or at least I've found them challenging, and things that I've worked at it once you start to have to like actually shift things, because you have to have a sense of devotion to yourself that you're going to follow through with that change, right? It does get easier over time for sure. Now I look at like in my relationships, like I wouldn't even, like the way I wouldn't even be able to go back to that, So it takes time, and we have to give ourselves grace with those things. And some things will be harder than others in our life to shift and to navigate as well. So how can we shift our perspective of where we're at and how we can approach the situation differently and start to shift our beliefs around that situation or that pattern we keep finding ourselves in? The fourth one is we have to replace the pattern. And so we have to introduce healthy habits, or we need to change our thought process around things, or like change up the actions we take. So for me, again, I'll just use the relationship piece since it's an easy one for me to use. But for me, this was like, how do I keep showing up? How do I communicate? And having to shift how I communicate and put in boundaries with what I was dealing with when I'm like, this is what I'm looking for. And if someone was being flaky, or if someone was kind of like, you end up with, there's people that kind of tell you what you want to hear kind of thing, right? And so when people were starting to do that, I knew right away, I'm like, nope, this just isn't for me. This is what I'm looking for. If you can't say yes to that and be like, yep, I want that too, and show it also within your actions, like I was out, right? And so I had to set boundaries and pull myself out of that. And that got hard, right? Or that was hard in the beginning. But I was like, I just kept telling myself, like, I deserve better. I deserve better. And so I had to shift and replace the pattern of, one, how I communicated, but also what I tolerated. And it's sometimes easier, and this is my personal experience, I feel like it's sometimes easier to stop tolerating things from other people versus changing what you'll tolerate for yourself. And what I mean by that is, I've always found it easier to be like, I'm going to walk away from that situation, versus if I have to change my eating habits, or if I have to work out more or do a different type of workout or whatever. Like, it's so much harder for me to say, I deserve this, or I tolerate like more, or I tolerate more, I tolerate less. I don't tolerate less than this goal or this, you know what I mean? It's harder when it's like yourself, I find. And that, I think, is maybe one of my own things. Some people might disagree and say it's the opposite, but I've found it's harder sometimes. And I think it's an accountability thing. It's a lot easier to sit there in your brain and just be like, oh, I'll just like do it tomorrow, or I'll do it later, or, I've got time, right? And it's an easy excuse that we can kind of use to just, again, stay stuck, or to just perpetuate the cycle. So we have to replace the pattern. And then number 5 is kind of what I was saying, is like staying accountable. So now you have to remain consistent, and you have to also be compassionate for yourself in the process. And those two things can be very, very hard, especially if it's new to you, especially if you haven't been through it maybe before, or you haven't maybe pushed yourself in that way. The fears start to creep up, right? Like, what am I doing this for? Am I even going to get the results that I want, right? Like, all of these little things can start to creep up, and that's when it gets really hard to be accountable. And that's where we need to just be compassionate for ourselves. I know if I like link this back into like health, when it comes to like eating better or exercising more, if there's a day where you're not, like, don't be perfect, just be consistent. There was a girl that I was doing some training stuff under, and she would always say that, like, we're not looking for perfection. You don't have to eat perfect. You don't have to be perfect. We just need you to be consistent, right? And so if you fall off a little bit, just get back on, right? Just be consistent. And so I think it's the same sort of thing no matter what you're dealing with, whether it's your business or relationships or your health. Just get back on the wagon. Just keep moving towards the changing of that cycle. And eventually things will get easier. Again, some cycles are harder for us to break. Sometimes we can break cycles with just, again, like a shift of like, I'm just not tolerating this anymore. But I think sometimes when we get to that point, it's kind of like we're at that breaking point. Like we've already been pushed way too far. And so something's got to give. And so there is sometimes, I think, a timing thing of just where we're at in our life and what's the most important to us right now. I would imagine most people have like, more than one area where they feel stuck or want to shift and grow and see change. Even if it's not like a cycle they're stuck in, we always want growth in different areas of our life, right? And sometimes some of those areas take more of a priority over others, and we have to be compassionate with ourselves with that process too, that we can't change it all at once. So what I would suggest if you are a person who is dealing with, again, like feeling like you're stuck in a cycle, obviously you can check out my workshop. It's called Liberated, and I'll leave the link for that down below. It's free. It's like 20 minutes. I also have my breakthrough sessions that I do with people, and those are just one-off sessions. It's one-on-one, you and I, on a Zoom call, and we essentially walk through, okay, where do you feel stuck? What do you feel is blocking you? What emotions do you feel like are coming up for you? What's going on in your body? Because I tie the physical body into all of this as well, because our patterns and our emotions and our tensions show up there. And then I give you basically a framework or ideas of things that you can use or utilize or start to implement for you to start to shift your narrative, for you to start to shift how you go about things. And I give you not only tools and stuff, but also suggestions of where you can start to change, or even just like a strategy a little bit of how to implement these things and to make it a little easier on yourself and not like overwhelm yourself. So those are two things. Now, the other thing is just on your own, like journal, like, write out what's coming up for you, write out the pattern you want to break, write up the emotions that come up with that, or like what do you feel is keeping you stuck where you are. And try to not blame it on like other people or outside influences. Like genuinely look at yourself and be like, okay, how could I show up differently here? Or how am I contributing to this? And take honest responsibility and accountability for it. But, don't do it from a place of shame. Just look at it from like a third person perspective, right? Like if you were an outside person, because it's always so much easier when we're that. But if you're like your friend and you or your friend looking at the situation, where would you say, well, maybe if you approached it this way, or maybe you not having boundaries, or maybe you not communicating well, or maybe, your energy levels or whatever, like managing some of those things, or, where we put our time, where we put our energy, looking at all those things, how could we look at things differently? And so looking up what emotions are coming up for you, along with the cycle that you are wanting to break, and what have your actions been? And if you're having a hard time with the emotions, I would look up or not look up, but reflect on what is, when you are in a day or at a moment where you're having a hard time with the cycle, you find yourself like falling back into the pattern or the habit. What comes up for you? How do you feel typically when you dive back into the pattern or the habit? Like, was there a stress that day? Did, your mom call you? Like, what is the thing that kind of like set you off kind of over the edge that was kind of the trigger, if you will, for you falling back into that habit? And then when you can almost like put yourself back into that sort of state where you're like, what's the feeling? Where do I feel it in my body, right? All of these little things, the more specific you can get, the more clear it's going to be as to what the thing actually is that's blocking you. And again, some situations it's pretty black and white, like it's pretty easy to see. There's not really any gray zone. Other things are a little bit harder. Don't get caught up in trying to get all the specific details. Like sometimes it might just be something as simple as what mine was, which was communication and boundaries. And I don't really need to know the emotion behind that. I just need to know those two things, and I can start to already change the action I'm taking, right? So again, don't overwhelm yourself. Try to make the process as simple as you can, but writing it out, you can, again, like I said, watch the workshop, or you can even book a breakthrough session with me as well. I do also, it's beginning of December of 2024 when I'm recording this, and I am also opening up 5 coaching spots in my group program for Elevate Her, for women who are wanting to, again, shift, change, and tie this physical, emotional, mental aspect, spiritual aspect, look at everything so you can start to not only live more authentically and in alignment with yourself and your energy, but also get you to where you're trying to go through your goals, your dreams, your aspirations, and just, again, cycles, patterns, things you want to break. And then I'm opening up 1 spot for private as well. So those are available as well as other options. But again, you can start by doing this on your own. You can start by doing some smaller things first. Whatever you feel is going to be the most supportive for you. If you have any questions, if you're on YouTube, you can obviously comment below, that sort of thing. I will gladly respond to you as best as I can. If you follow me on Instagram, you can just shoot me a message on Instagram. But otherwise, that's pretty much what I got for you guys today. So hopefully that was supportive for you guys. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me know if you enjoyed it. And like I said, I post a lot more on my Instagram of just throughout the week, little tidbits through my content. So if that is something that interests you, definitely follow me on Instagram as well. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful day, wonderful evening, whatever time it is when you're watching this. Thank you all so much for being here. I know, like I said, it's been a minute, so I appreciate you all for coming back and watching and listening. And yeah, I can't wait to do the next episode for you. So again, I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye.